humanist perspective presented by the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, following our few principles of humanism.
We're committed to the use of science and reason for understanding the universe and for solving human problems. We're skeptical of untested claims of knowledge, but we're open to new ideas.
We are concerned with securing justice and fairness in society and in ending intolerance and discrimination. We are committed to the total separation of religion and government.
We affirm humanism as a realistic alternative to the theologies of despair and the ideologies of violence. We reject the concept of an afterlife and believe in living a full and rewarding life here and now.
We value and respect each individual's right to judge and lead their lives according to their own position, as long as it's respectful of other people, living in a free society.
We hope you enjoy today's program and others in the weeks to follow. Hello again. Thanks for being with us. I'm Harry Greenberger, the host for the show. We have a very interesting guest with us today. It is Reverend Edward Vacek, recently appointed Stephen J. Duffy Chair in Roman Catholic Theology at Loyola University here in New Orleans. And there he teaches moral theology. And he's the author of Love, Human, and Divine. He came to my, Dr. Vacek came to my attention when I saw an article in the Times-Picayune, and it's in February this year, and it said moral theologian held court at Loyola. And the topic of his talk was grace, what's love got to do with it? At the same time, our organization, the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, was sponsoring a talk at UNO by a man named Dan Barker, who was a former evangelistic preacher who became an atheist. And the name of his talk was Morality, What's God Got to Do with It? So I saw these two things. What's God got to do with it? What's love got to do with it? And I thought, well, this is something we ought to explore. And so, Dr. Vacek, I'm going to let you start out by telling us what this is all about.
Thank you for having me first. Okay, it's a pleasure to be here. My situation is just simply, I'm new to New Orleans, okay, and I was being asked to give a talk for the chair, the Stephen Duffy chair that I now hold. If I were to go back and look at the relationship between our group and your group, so to speak, I'm a Jesuit, and Jesuit is a Catholic priest, a particular kind of a Catholic priest, and we have long since been understood to be humanists. So not in the sense of your humanism, which has got a negative part, but a positive sense of humanism. We're strongly, strongly, strongly in favor of the human. So developing an understanding of what it means to be a human being is what I, as a Jesuit, have long been trying to do.
But we, as humanists, and with a capital H, humanists, okay. I guess our basic tenet is the golden rule: do unto others, you would have them do unto you. And since we are convinced that we will not have a second life, an afterlife, our objective is to live a full, rewarding life here and now, which you would, of course, agree with.
Exactly.
But now the question is how you determine what is such a full and rewarding life, okay? Now, I interrupted you. Carry on.
Okay, so we're both humanists in that particular sense. You may want to say a capital H, and I'll want to say a small h, but in either form. And the part of being a moral theologian is to say, well, what does it mean to be a human being? Morality is, and the word moral and ethics, or sometimes people distinguish them, but generally speaking, they're the same sort of a word. So,
yes.
Okay, so people are trying to be ethical, trying to be moral. So my role as a theologian and as a person who gave that particular talk is first and foremost to talk about what it means to be a human being. And probably the difference between the capital H and the small h is that you have a negative, namely there is no God, and I have a positive that there's something more to be added, something else to be added, and it has to do with the relationship to God. So when I gave this particular talk, the central starting point of it all is that we have human experience. People have human experience. You have human experience. I have human experience. And that's the starting point for, it seems to me, one understanding, positive understanding of what religion is about, and a positive understanding of what Christianity is about. And so we're both working out of the experiential sort of mode. And
we have experiences, but then the manner in which we explain them or justify them or even question them may be different between our approach and yours.
It could well be. In fact, it probably is. And so it has to do with different kinds of experiences. And there's the experience that a physicist has. There's the experience that a chemist has. There's the experience that a carpenter has. There's the experience that an economist has. And there's the experience that religious folks have. And each one of those has their own validity, except that you wouldn't accept the latter one, but I presume you'd accept the sense of experience that an economist has, the sense of experience that a politician has, the sense that an ordinary homemaker has. And so all of us have these general kind of broad senses of experience. Well, some of us are specialized in one area rather than another.
Oh, we all have, living is a series of experiences.
Exactly.
And the question is, how we explain it to ourselves or to others.
Quite
you
right.
seem to be particularly interested in the concept of love. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that.
Well, sure. Okay, and I'll do so in a way that perhaps is not familiar to your audience, but I'll work on it. I once was teaching, and in the Christian sphere, there's two commandments. One is to love God, and one is to love the neighbor. Okay, all right. And those are said to be central. What I have come to what I asked myself at the time is there any connection between these two? So that's part of the question that was there. And so I wrote the book. I sometimes humorously say to my students to discuss the word "and." You know, first commandment and second commandment, or first commandment, therefore second commandment, which is the business of what does God have to do with morality. So I've been trying to, and this is not a pitch for the book, but I've been trying to work on that particular connection for much of my life. That led me to go back and say, well, what does love mean? And so that was where the major part of the work is to do that. It is odd, and again, it may be not interesting to your listeners, but it is odd that most Christians use the word love and they do not have much to say about it. They simply presume that it has a kind of common meaning. So much of the task of the book was to go back and to look at, well, what do I mean by love? I am by training not a theologian in this particular sense. I'm by training a philosopher, and I worked with a big word called phenomenology, which is another just long word for saying experience. Mm-hmm. And what is human experience like in terms of what it means to love another human being? So I've spent several years trying to figure out what love might mean in 300 pages rather than the usual 300 words.
All right. Well, you were kind enough to forward to me the speech that you gave, and I have a couple of items that interested me.
Surely.
And you said, not only love, but all emotions are not willable. Mm-hmm. We cannot just will ourselves to be fearful or to be angry. Mm-hmm. Similarly, we cannot just decide to love someone. Mm-hmm. We can will ourselves to give food to the poor, but we cannot will ourselves to love them. Mm-hmm. Now, do you have to will yourself to love someone? What love, aside from romantic love, would mean to really care for the well-being of this other person. Are you saying you can't will yourself to have that kind of love? How do you get it?
Well, that's a wonderful kind of a question. There's two different meanings of care that you in the word that you just used. One is I can go out and do things for you, and that would seem to be I'm caring for you. In other words, I could, and to put in one of the persons that I described there as a former Jesuit who used to say, I hate 95% of the people I love. Or translated, I hate 95% of the people I care for. He was an Iraqi and therefore had all these kind of flamboyant statements.
Well, someone who I can't recall said, I love humanity. It's just the people I can't stand.
That's another one. I think that might have been Dickens, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, yeah. But so what one can force one to do is move one's arm, move one's leg, bring food to the poor. One can force oneself to do that and simply will that I'm going to do that. The affections, which is central to the work that I've been doing, and I'd like to go along and talk about religion as primarily an affectional sort of a matter. The affections you can't simply will in the sense of I'm now going to be angry. I can give you something to be mad about, but if I sit here placidly and am happy, you couldn't just say, well, I'm going to get angry at this man because he's given me no reason to be angry.
But aren't those emotions biological?
Of course, everything is biological. Everything is chemical. Everything is physical. But it's also something more than that. I mean, in other words, you and I are talking, okay? And our brains are working all the time. It's a biological phenomenon, but we're also having an intelligent conversation, not just a biological conversation.
I hope so.
Yes, I hope so too. Thank you. So everything is biological, everything is chemical, everything is physical, sure, everything is spatial, everything is temporal, but is there something more than that? If I could talk about, once upon a time, and I don't know what the chemists would say these days, but you are, and I don't mean this by an insult, you're probably worth about $18.
The chemicals.
Yeah, chemicals,
Yeah, well, that's maybe more than anyone would pay for it.
Okay, but anyone who says that you're only worth $18 is just wrong in terms of what it means to be a human being. Or to turn it around, if we would move it up to $100 or $200 or $1,000 or whatever, that's called slavery. So the tradition, people either say you're invaluable or that you're...
But you're suggesting that as a human being, there's more than physical, that there is what, a soul? Is that what we're getting? Is that where we're going?
But the soul, just talk about the fact that we are human beings. We're more than just the other animals. Okay.
Okay, but what makes us the more?
Yeah, what makes us the more is our capacity to talk with one another, our capacity to think, our capacity to feel. Okay.
Okay.
Now, it isn't that dogs can't think in some sense. It isn't that dogs can't feel in some sense. It isn't that dogs can't choose in some sense.
They're just not up to our level. They haven't evolved that far.
Yeah, that's right. So we have a different level of level of relating to one another, and that's the basic idea of saying that human beings are more important than the other animals. So this is simply a matter of seeing that there are different levels of existence, different kinds of existence.
Okay.
Whether you want to call it soul or whether you want to just call it that human beings have a much higher capacity, and a capacity to do not just quantitatively higher capacity, but we have libraries and dogs don't have libraries.
But is it your position that whether you call it soul or spirit, or that it is something that lives on beyond the physical body?
Yeah, that's a hard question, actually.
I wanted to ask you a hard question.
Okay, and I've not been there. All right, that's the first part. Okay, so then the second part, is that when I die, something will die pretty clearly. They'll put something in the grave. Okay,
yes.
No problem of that. So then there's this confidence of will I in some sense go on?
We would all like to believe that we would.
Yeah, we would like to.
Where is the how can you logically demonstrate that to be the case?
Oh, I can't. Okay.
Or no one else can either.
Yeah, but in terms of logically demonstrate, now there is this other thing though, and as you just described it well, you hope that you go on, and you have a confidence, not that you think you do, but you would like it to believe that you would go on.
I think everyone would, because that's one of the elementary questions. What happens to me when I die? And that's why there are so many religious people, because religions have an answer. They tell you what's going to happen. Us secularists, we have an answer too. What happens when I die? Nothing. It's all over.
Yeah, and
that's 2 points of view.
Two very different points of view, and that has to do with, again, as I described, that there's chemistry and physics, and there's the ordinary humanity. And is there, that's the question, and I believe, yes, is there yet another dimension, and it's that other dimension that we would be talking about there. So, and that's why, in my view, humanism with the capital H is just missing something. Now, you could say I'm making up the small h, I'm making up this other thing, but that's where we would be different.
Well, when you say that we're missing something, and I have this little plaque, I guess, that I frequently use, which says, atheism is a conclusion, not a belief. So we use our logic, and we conclude that there is no supreme being. Now, to conclude otherwise, you have to take that leap of faith. Do you agree with
that? That'd be two ways. It's a fascinating thing to put it that way. First, I'm not sure atheism is a conclusion. All right, that's the first thing to say, because proving that something doesn't exist is very, 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 very hard.
Well, yeah, but the burden of proof is on the person who says that it does exist.
But your point there is that it is a conclusion. So
it is a conclusion.
The burden of proof is now on you, because you're saying you can conclude this. So you're proving a negative, which is pretty hard to do. It's not.
Well, what we say is we have yet to see any evidence of the existence.
That's a very different. That's not a conclusion. It's I haven't seen the evidence, which is to say.
Oh, well, let me tell you, if suddenly the skies opened up and this supernatural being spoke to us, we would accept that. Okay. But we haven't. But that hasn't happened.
I'm okay. And the difference between you and a religious person is that in that, not that metaphorical sense, but in another sense, the sky has opened up for the religious person. So,
yes, I'm aware of that.
Yeah, so that's part of the
let me ask you this, because your talk, which attracted me, said, "What's grace? What's love got to do with it? What is grace?"
Well, that's actually that was the task. My role as a theologian is twofold. One is this, but one of the major parts of it is to try and make sense out of a whole lot of religious words. And lots of religious words just get used again and again and again, and mind-numbingly so. People say God blesses us, and this has happened, and God is, and people rarely reflect on that. That doesn't mean that they're wrong. Okay. Any more than people say I can talk when they don't think about what talking is. I can think, but they don't know what thinking is. And there are whole areas of philosophy which are talking about knowledge, and courses upon courses upon courses on knowledge, and yet you and I know just in a kind of primitive way. So the Christians have lots and lots of words. People have lots and lots of words that I think, that I take it as my responsibility to start to articulate and say, what, pray tell, do people mean by this?
By the word grace.
By the word grace. And so what happened is in this particular context, Stephen Duffy, who gave the money for the chair that I'm now holding, he used to talk a lot about grace. I've written lots and lots and lots about love, and I thought, well, as the kind of the first thing I should do as part of the holder of the chair is I should honor him and put the two together. So the task here is actually, I hope, rather original. It is to say that we take this 5-letter word grace, which people use, and turn it into a 4-letter word called love, and to see whether I could make some sense out of the strong contentious tradition of grace that has been going on for 1,000 years, 2,000 years, back to Augustine, back to the scriptures, and we use it commonly. People say in Christian language, I'm going to say grace before meals or grace after meals, and that's one sort of thing. And then people talk about God is grace, and then they talk about, I got several graces, and I start scratching my head and saying,
you got me scratching my head.
Yes, exactly. What is it that people are talking about? So that was the task I set for myself, is to see if I could make sense out of this word, much as I could make sense out of the word love, as I tried to, for a long time, to make sense out of the word love. And so I thought, well, let's see if I can put these two together. And that's what I was trying to do. When I began to think about love, then I began to think about the kinds of experiences you and I have all the time. I hope, you know, I can.
But now you say when you put these two together, and you look at grace and you look at love, and your conclusion is that they're the same thing?
One way they're the same thing, another way that they're not.
Well, how are they not?
Okay, they're not in the sense that a dog can love food, and that's not what I would call grace, okay?
I think a dog can love its master, too.
Sure, oh, definitely, yes, okay, that's fine, too. So those are different. I think dogs can love. I think there's lots and lots of different kinds of love. I happen to be known as somebody who likes chocolate or loves chocolate, okay? So, I mean, that's a pretty strange.
That's a different definition of love.
A different definition, and there are many different definitions of love. And so what I tried to do is to say we have all of these ordinary meanings of love, and then we have another meaning called God loves us. You can say that it doesn't exist, but at least that's part of the Christian tradition. And we have another meaning talking about us loving God. And so I tried to say, well, if we were to talk about love in a more religious context, then I think we can just substitute for the word grace, love.
Now, when you say God loves us, and then, of course, the question is then, how do we account for the fact that bad things happen to good people?
Oh, it's a very, very, very hard question. And I suspect we will not resolve it, but we can try, okay? The first thing to say there is that there's lots of evil out there. Lots of good out there, okay?
Yeah.
And one looks at the evil and one says, what about it? What sense can we make about it? I think my response to it is it is something to be overcome. You're not answering yet your question of why it's there, but it is something to be overcome. As I look at my own tradition, it's very intent. In fact, some would say it can be reduced to, but I don't think that's right, can be reduced to an attempt to overcome the problems of evil in the world. And the witness of people who are religious is that this is our great vocation, or one of the great tasks of our vocation or of our life is to overcome evil. Hence, we have soup kitchens. Hence, when a hurricane comes to New Orleans, people who are in this religious vein say, the God that I know, experience, is a God who's trying to overcome all of these kinds of evils. And so that's a major, major significant part of it all.
If I think I understand what you said, the hurricane in New Orleans that injured a lot of good people was caused by the devil? Is that what you're
It was caused by wind and sun.
But I mean, if God loves us and can control things, but he has this rival, which is the devil, or what?
I think it's. I mean, I would not use the devil, okay, and I would not use a rival there. So.
Well, then, what would cause these things like hurricanes that drown good religious people? What is the cause there?
Well, I think at least probably where I would disagree with the image that you have is understanding God as a puppeteer. I mean, the person whom you've also interviewed, let me put it that way.
All-seeing, all-knowing, all-wise,
but also all-controlling.
And controlling.
Yeah, all-controlling. And that I don't think if you have that kind of a God, if that's your understanding of God, then of course the immediate question is why all these bad things? But if you have a different kind of a God who is love, and put that together with an evolutionary world, a world that is developing and that goes from chaos, utter chaos, to ever more unity and ever more unity, such that we eventually get molecules, and then we eventually get chemicals.
But if God can't control everything, why do you pray and ask him to change something or do something if he's not if you can't control it?
Well, I think for the same reason, I don't know whether you're married or not, but the same reason you talk to your wife, or I talk to my friends about things that need to be done, in order to have that kind of a conversation about what needs to be done, and to get in touch with the ways that I should do to live my life to alter these evil things that happen.
Okay.
So it's a conversational kind of a matter, rather than asking God to come in and change this but not change that, and make my football team win and not your football team win.
But that is what people do with regularity.
No doubt
I have
about it.
another item that came from your talk that I wanted to ask you about. You say, we often, and with reason, say we know that God knows everything that currently exists. What do you mean when you say we often, with reason, say that we know that? Tell me what that what that says.
Okay, let's see if I can try and explain. The understanding of God that I have is that God is the source of, foundation of, the ground of all that exists. So it's not that God created something way back when and then let it go, which is a more deist understanding of God, but rather that God is contemporaneous, if I could put it that way, of all that is. So just as you and I are contemporaneous right now, I know that you are here, and with reason I know that you are here, because I've got a mind and we've got senses.
I think we can agree on that. Now, but why doesn't it just say we often, with faith, feel that God knows everything, instead of saying often with reason we know that?
Okay, good question. And I think it has to do with an earlier point that you've tried to make, and I think so. It has to do with what William James, the psychologist, 1900s, early 1900s, described, and that is that there is a certain leap that takes place, a leap of faith, okay?
All right.
And once, and remember, William James had the big trench, and how do you know what's on this side of the trench unless you jump over?
Right.
And when you jump over it, you say, oh, I can now see. And so it takes a leap to get across.
Right.
In the same way that if you and I are conversing and I say, this is not a human being in front of me, this is just a machine in front of me, I'm going to have therefore I'm not going to, why should I talk to you? I'll never have a conversation with you because, hey, you're just a machine.
Yes.
So it takes a leap of faith for me to believe that you're an intelligent human being.
Each of us believes the other one is a human being here.
That's right.
We got a minute or so left, so I'm going to let you say whatever you would like our audience to hear.
All right. What I'm trying to do, and what I think is important to do, is to see some connection between all the things that the capital H humanists do, which is this life makes good sense and it has some bad things in it. And then to add a religious dimension to that is what the religious people do and say, and God is also involved in all of this. So it's not just we human beings and this earth and this 13.7 billion years, but there's also another dimension, just as chemistry is different than physics, is different than biology. There's another dimension which is called the religious dimension, and I want to keep them all on the table.
And you would agree that morality exists in religious terms, and that we non-religious people also have valid morality.
Oh, of course. That's what the point of the humanism. Yes, of course.
Exactly, because our morality comes from experience.
So does ours.
Some things turn out to be beneficial to yourself or the human race or your family. Other things turn out to be harmful.
Exactly.
And that is a basis for morality.
And it's a basis for commonality between us. And the difference is that the Christian then and God's involved in all of that too.
Okay, thank you for being here. Thank you folks for watching our show. We hope we will see you often.